Tiffany D. Jackson is a critically acclaimed author of young adult novels and has a background in TV and film. Growing up, she always wanted to be a writer, but that was a scary dream for a family of immigrants. She was able to convince her parents to let her do a film program instead. Midway into a successful career in film, she applied the hustle and gumption she'd learned, along with a deeper understanding of audience and pacing, and started writing novels. It wasn't easy. Tiffany credits her mentor with talking her out of quitting, and also for giving her feedback that unlocked all the success that would follow. To learn more about Tiffany, using her experiences to tell impactful stories, and why writing a quality first novel saved her career, be sure to listen to today's episode of the Fearless Storyteller podcast. Hello, and welcome to the Fearless Storyteller podcast. I'm your host, Ethan Freckleton. Have you ever noticed how fear stops us from creating and sharing our best work? Join the Fearless Storyteller as we explore the heart and soul of writing stories, songs, and scripts that sell with the people who write them. Each guest has their own unique hero's journey and insights into the intersections between limiting beliefs and success. In exchange for your support on Patreon, you'll receive monthly one-on-one sessions with yours truly. I'm a certified master life coach, and I've worked with best-selling authors, award-winning filmmakers, and everything in between. Help fund the show today and get the support you need to take the next step forward on your own unique journey as a storyteller. Again, visit patreon.com/Ethan Freckleton. All right. Enough with that. On to today's show. Well, Tiffany D. Jackson, welcome to the Fearless Storyteller podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, my pleasure. And my thing is I like to let my guests introduce themselves, let people know what you want to share about yourself.
Oh, wow. Actually, I should be able to do this, right? Because I do this a lot. But I still always get very nervous.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's always, well, anyway. So my name is Tiffany D. Jackson. I'm an author of several young adult novels, including Allegedly, Monday's Not Coming, Grown, and Let Me Hear a Rhyme. Before I became a full-time author, which only happened about maybe 4 years ago at this point, I used to work in television for about 15 years. So that's why I feel like it's still strange for me to introduce myself like as an author when, I was sort of always behind the scenes, I guess.
Yeah. And well, we're still kind of behind, I suppose, the pages, right? For the
Yes.
most part. We're letting our imagination be the actors. Well, so you've been involved in some way or another then with stories professionally for 20 years. And,
Yes, actually, I've been sort of in the storytelling field since high school. You had like those high school programs. I was in like a film program since my sophomore year of high school. So
okay.
I've been just sort of like, I've always been into stories from a child. Even honestly, I always wanted to be a writer. It was a little scary. It was a scary dream for the rest of my family.
Oh, really? Like you'd get reactions when you'd share you wanted to be a writer?
Oh, absolutely. Especially, kind of coming from a family who, either they were immigrated from this country or, just the, nature of everything that happens and just striving and surviving. The thought of being an author, which has that connotation of, being a starving artist, because you never know if that person is actually going to succeed or not, is quite frightening. And, so honestly, I understand their trepidations. Even now, I understand what they were kind of thinking back then. And I think that's the beauty of the industry right now, all industries right now, is that there's so many doors that are opening that we all are able to sit at the table and eat.
Yeah. Yeah. And so that wasn't true when you were a kid, or at least that wasn't perceived as true when you were
Oh
a
no,
child.
yeah, no,
So
no.
what was it that drew you to that dream?
Um, it was a dream that wouldn't let go of me.
Hmm.
Like, it's a dream that you've always had, and it sort of like kind of has you at the throat. And you can ignore it, you can kind of go about your business and stuff like that. But every now and then, like, something will sort of like creep in the back of your mind, or a character will pop up, and
Hmm.
it just becomes something that you can't avoid.
Hmm.
And so when dreams are that intense, you have to answer them. You have to actually at least try to answer them, or you will never feel at peace.
Hmm. Hmm. So this film program opens up. Were you aware of it before you signed up for it? Or was it just something that like sounded like fun?
Someone actually suggested it to my mother,
Hmm.
who signed me up, and I was able to do it for about 2 summers before I graduated high school. And it was one of those things, because it was something that was, a passion of mine. And, even convincing my parents to let me go to film school was, also a feat in itself.
Hmm.
But at least that something was a bit more tangible, like film, you can go so many different avenues, versus being an author is very much it's one road.
Yeah.
You can have several genres, but there's one road in publishing.
Right. Right.
So I think that's where I kind of, I always had the bug. I tell students this because I go and talk to kids about, the journey to get to where I am today.
Hmm.
I always say that, the one thing that actually inspired me to really go after it, like I knew I was going to be in film, because up until maybe my sophomore year, I was like, well, I guess I'll just be a nurse.
Hmm.
I couldn't think of anything else I wanted to do.
Yeah.
And then I saw the movie Titanic,
Uh-huh.
and it was such an elaborate, beautiful production, like from just like the sets to everything. And that I
Hmm.
was like, I want to be in film. Like immediately, as soon as I left the theater, I was like,
Hmm.
yes, I want to be in
Hmm.
film. So that was it's one of the kind of the cool things about art, right? Is that, you never know what's actually going to, light a fire under you.
Yeah. Yeah. Isn't it interesting how much pressure we feel to solve our entire lives when we're in high school?
Right? Which, honestly, I almost get, because college just really flies by, and
Yeah.
it's you want to soak in every moment of that independence that you never really truly had up until, your freshman
Yeah.
year of college. But at the
Yeah.
same time, you're also supposed to like figure out like what you want to do with your life.
Yeah.
And it's such a rush at that point. So in a way, yeah, I understand it. But one of the great things about, college in itself is that even though you could graduate with one degree, you can find yourself doing completely different things.
Yeah.
Or you find yourself not graduating a degree, but you meet the right people that turns into organizations or websites or films. There's so many CEOs that didn't graduate
Mm.
college.
Mm-hmm.
So I always kind of say, like, college is really what you should be focused on is networking.
Mm.
Like, whether it be, and mostly it's networking across, because the people that are sitting next to you are going to be the people who are going to be out in the field with you. And so I always tell, young filmmakers,
Mm.
kind of join arms and, get out there and produce films all together, like, collab and bring all your resources together. That's how you get noticed,
Yeah.
because of that hustle type of spirit. And I definitely feel like I was instilled a lot of those values. I went to Howard University, which
Mm.
is in Washington, D.C. And
Mm-hmm.
yeah, from a very, from jump, they basically said, like, fake it until you make it. And
That's
that
good
has,
advice.
yeah, that has definitely been number one of how we made so many films and so many projects happen.
Yeah. Well, so Howard University, that's a big deal, right?
Yes, yeah.
Like, was it easy getting in, or is like that a process where you felt like you were staking everything on the chance of getting in?
That's another kind of funny story. Howard was actually my fourth choice school.
Oh, really? Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't really know about school. And Howard, for those listening, Howard University is a historical Black college. And I didn't know about those. There was no one in my family who went to an HBCUs.
Mm-hmm.
So it wasn't like, and I was really the first in my family to really graduate from a four-year college.
Mm-hmm.
So, there was no one like within my vicinity that was able to like kind of teach me about this school. I happened to find it in one of those, remember those books that we used to get that had all the colleges that would say
Mm-hmm.
like, the percentage of people. And I saw that this college was like 90% Black. And I was
Yeah.
going to a predominantly white high school. And I was like, I want to go here. But, but
Yeah.
but it was my fourth choice school because I was applying to all these really intensive film programs.
Yeah.
UCLA, NYU, and Miami College, which actually has a really great film program.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't get into UCLA. I got into NYU, and it just seemed so ridiculous to spend so much money to go like down the street. And then I got waitlisted for the University of Miami, and I was so insulted.
Yeah.
For some reason. And so finally I was like, well, let's check out this Howard school. And I went and, I fell in love with it. It was very much like, it felt like I was in a hug immediately.
Yeah.
The moment I did a school visit there. And I think I really needed that. I think sometimes in the midst of like kind of going to schools that, look great on your resume for whatever reason, like whether it's an Ivy League or, a major football school or whatever the case is, there is something about a school that really nurtures you and, constantly feel like you're in a family. So even though like it's been like umpteen years since I've graduated, I can still go anywhere in the world and say I went to Howard University, and then 9 times out of 10 I will find someone else that went there, and immediately we're cousins. So I think that is just as like I keep saying, it's all about networking. There have been so many opportunities that I've been presented with just simply because I went to the school.
Yeah. Well, that's powerful. Yeah. And that sense of belonging too.
Yeah, right.
Well, I notice, sort of jumping around a bit, but it seems like a good time.
Yeah.
Because I was going to ask it, one of your stories, at least one, right, Grown, the protagonist is a person of color in a most predominantly white high school, right? And I was curious then if that was, written from your personal experience and what that means to you, like what that brings up in terms of story or life, and how it just impacts the kinds of stories you want to tell.
Well, Grown definitely came a lot from my own experiences. Grown is about a young woman who was an aspiring artist who was basically swooned by a legendary yet older R&B superstar with promises of fame. And it's basically about an age inappropriate relationship and how grooming happens, and the adultification of Black girls, especially in these type of environments, whether it be the music industry or predominantly white high schools.
Yeah.
And so I definitely filtered a lot of my own experiences. I'm nowhere a singer at all. But myself, I actually was in an age inappropriate relationship, and I also was in a predominantly white high school. So this was the one book that I actually feel like I was able to apply some more of my own emotions to the story. And I think it's also important because especially in today's climate where, we don't really take the time to sort of pay attention to the ideas of like what a girl, specifically a Black girl, what her experiences can be like in predominantly white high school, and
Yeah.
how, like we said earlier, like you're trying to figure out your life, but you're
Mm.
also, you're also trying to kind of like feed off racist teachers or
Mm.
racist classmates,
Mhm.
all in the midst of that. So there's a lot of pressure and intensity around that time. And it's unfortunate that, there are many girls out there who are experiencing that
Mm.
also, but on top of that, experiencing racism on an everyday
Yeah.
basis. And there's no kind of easy solution. Like, some parents don't have like the money to just up and leave because you don't like, the classmate that
Mm.
you're in, your history classmate or whatever the case is.
Yeah.
So it really is, I hope more stories like this happen, in terms of kind of bringing attention to that.
Yeah. So for you personally, why now for this story? Like you're 20 years into a creative career, right? Why was now the right time to put that book out?
I really got the inspiration from the Surviving R. Kelly documentary aired
Mm.
about almost 2 years ago now, and at the time I didn't watch it because I think I was touring around that time. But
Mm.
what I did watch was the response to the documentary,
Mm.
and I was watching all of these adults put the blame solely on the girls
Mm.
and saying like they knew what they were doing, and why didn't they just leave, and etc. And there was a lot of victim blaming, and I thought
Yeah.
like, especially as someone who has been through that type of situation, I know it's not that easy to leave, and I know that at the end of the day, no matter, like, there's two people in the room, there's
Mm.
an adult and a child, and an adult knows better, so why aren't we looking at
Mm.
the adults?
Mhm.
So I really wanted to specifically write a novel that is tailored to kids because at the end of the day, a lot of information is sort of filtered down through to kids, and
Yeah.
I from adults who quite frankly have incorrect opinions or information.
Mhm.
So I wanted to sort of like lay out the land and show kids how grooming happens, how like these type of situations happened, and how it may feel impossible to leave. So that way, kids can kind of have slightly more empathy for these girls. So
Yeah.
I thought that this was like kind of the best time, especially with, so many other, and, that was just the R. Kelly
Yeah.
um, documentary, but there were so many. There's Weinstein,
Yep.
Cosby,
Yep.
it was so many that I felt like we needed something to ground kids with.
Yeah. So you must have been pretty fired up. Yeah.
Yes.
Are you always that fired up? Like, is it that place of emotion or intent that leads to book proposal? Are you doing a project?
Oh, absolutely. I feel
Yeah.
like a lot of my books come from, they come from the idea that there's so much silence around Black girls
Mm.
and what they go through, whether it be in group homes or, missing Black teens
Yeah.
or, girls who are being sexually assaulted. But it always seems to be like the girls are like Black children seem to be silenced.
Mm.
And as someone who was at one point a Black girl,
Mm.
I wanted to sort of shine a light on some of the issues that, still happen to this day.
Mm.
At the end of the day.
Yeah. Yeah. It's not like everybody's going to read the book, right? But we might wish that they did.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Was that scary? Like to put your own experiences into that story?
Um, yes, quite frankly, yes, it very was. It was scary. Mostly because it also involved me kind of coming out to my family, who
Mm.
didn't know about any of this.
Mm.
But I thought it was important, to come out, especially to show specifically for girls who may be in the middle of something like that, the similar situation, that you are not defined by your mistakes.
Mm.
whatever mistakes those may be. Um, you can go on and have, a thriving career, go to college, make a bunch of friends, and also be an author. So I think it's important for us to show that, hey, adults are not perfect.
Yeah.
We have all made mistakes. We have all at some point lied to our parents about something,
Yeah.
whether it be something large, like, having a whole boyfriend, or, stealing a cookie when you weren't supposed to. I think it's important for us to kind of show kids that, we are not perfect,
Yeah.
and that's okay. And it's not, and to kind of alleviate some of the pressure that we are putting on them to be perfect.
Yeah. Yeah. And, we may not be defined by our mistakes, but in some sense, we're s- bettered or have a richer experience because of them, right?
Right. Exactly.
Like you wouldn't have been able to write this book if you didn't have your experiences.
Exactly.
Yeah. Or maybe you would have, but it wouldn't have been as true.
It would have, yeah, it would have been, I don't know if I didn't have this experience, I don't know if I would have stepped into this arena.
Yeah.
Um, because it's a very intense, painful kind of arena that,
Hmm.
needs to be handled with care. And sometimes people who have the best intentions, who are writing, stories that they have zero experience with, always miss something. And so I
Yeah.
think it's important to, kind of have that experience.
So that raises a question about own voices and that idea. So if there's a void in the marketplace, right, and
Hmm.
nobody's writing about a topic, is it better to have somebody enter into it and break that open as an own voices story, or is it good enough that like somebody's trying to speak to the experience?
Um, this is such a tricky topic because I guess, and like I said, I haven't been in this industry long,
Mm.
so I'm always sort of looking back at historically what has happened.
Hmm.
And what I've noticed is when there is a lull, let's say, or a void, it's not because no one stepped up to write that story.
Hmm.
That person was probably silenced, or
Yeah.
probably wasn't picked out of the slush pile, or
Hmm.
probably was told that their story wasn't good enough.
Mm.
So I think we sort of need to reframe this thought about own voices, because there is someone who can write that story. It's just a question of, are people really looking for that person?
Mm. Yeah. I like I have never worked on the other side, right, as a publisher, but
Hmm.
if I'm looking at and thinking about quality, right, and depth
Hmm.
and impact, then how could I not help but be gravitate towards stories that have truth, right,
Right, right.
and personal
Yeah.
truth? I know there's other
Because there,
reasons for publishing books.
I mean, yeah, there is something to be said about the idea of, like, I mean, and granted, most of my books are loosely inspired by real stories. So, and I can even speak to the thought of, like, hey, like especially for like my first book, allegedly that had to deal with girls in group homes and in the juvenile justice system.
Yeah.
And I've never been arrested. I've never been in a group home, but I'm also a Black girl.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot more of that. Like, I can actually understand the language and the pain and the hurt, um,
Yeah.
more than maybe someone else could. So there is a lot of research I did a lot of research to make that book possible, and
Mm.
included, like, speaking actually to girls who were in the juvenile system, and also speaking to psychologists, lawyers, doctors, you
Yeah.
name it. I spoke to everybody. Um, but that's something about, like, taking the care and having, what's the word, integrity
Mm.
in your work,
Mm-hmm.
which a lot of times when people aren't writing own voices, the research is really based on, like, Wikipedia searches.
Mm.
And you can tell, or, like, if they kind of did the Google Translate for for a person that, for a Spanish speaking person, like, there's laziness that's involved in that sometimes.
Yeah.
And I think that some people have gotten away with it because of the industry and because of like, sort of, lack of thoroughness.
Mm,
And now people are really sort of crossing their T's and dotting their I's and making sure. I mean, granted, things still slip through the cracks. But I do think that I think it is important for us to sort of make an effort.
mm,
I don't think anyone ever really made an effort in the past. The fact that there's still like, I think maybe it's like what 6% of books that are books that feature a Black character are written by people who are
mm,
Black.
mm. That's
In
crazy
me,
number.
y-
Yeah.
yes, I think that's like it's kind of like you're looking at that and I don't know if I would be on the other side, I'd be like, maybe we should maybe we should publish more Black books. I don't
Uh-huh.
know. I just I feel like I don't know. So I think it opens up a lot of I think the ideas of own voices or the conversation around own voices has turned into something that, I- it feels like people are trying to feel like, people are trying to police, and
Mm-hmm.
that's not the case.
Mm.
And I like I said, I haven't been in this industry long, but I can tell that it's not even about policing. It's about just like, hey, this is my story. Like
Yeah.
I would like you to tell my story properly. This is who I am. I
Yeah.
would like you to represent me properly. I
Yeah.
don't think that has anything to do with policing as much as to do with like, honoring, my person.
Mm.
So I think that that's something, that's hard to I understand that may be hard to grasp, but I think
Mhm.
but I think if you just try, like imagine if someone was telling your story and like completely screwed it up,
Yeah.
how would you feel?
Hmm. Yeah. Not. I, I feel like I wish I had been given a shot to tell my story.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. So why did you? So obviously, writing books was a dream, right? A childhood
Mhm.
dream, but you went into film for a number of years, and I'm curious, like, what you learned in that process and why you kind of stepped um, away in some aspect or toward, whatever your narrative is about that.
Oh, so yeah, I've been working in I was working in television, since the day I graduated college. So about that was about 15 years.
Hmm.
And I feel like I learned a lot, especially about the continuity of story.
Mm,
I learned a lot about pacing. I learned a lot about like what hooks audiences,
mm,
because that's super important. Ratings was everything in television. It still is. So it's really about like how does this grab our audience, and how do we keep them watching?
yeah.
I learned a lot about like the back end of the business. So from marketing to PR to web and social, I learned a lot about like there's so many facets that go into working on a project, and I really took that sort of like hustle and gumption and applied it to working on books, because the same thing in books. It's like you have to make sure you're talking to an audience, hooking them in, make sure your novel is paced well. I actually most of my books still follow a script kind of format.
Mm,
There's like it's a 3 act structure. I still follow the paradigm where there is plot points and midpoints. Like I still sort of still do that even in book format.
hmm.
Um, I understand the idea of knowing that there's a 6 month window of marketing window before a book comes out. Um, so yeah, there's a lot of things that I definitely applied and translated well into publishing. And when people ask me, do I miss television? Absolutely absolutely. I mean, I feel like I knew what I was doing there.
Mhm.
Like I was like I feel confident in saying I was good at my job.
Mhm.
I understood the madness of it. Working with celebrities or whoever it may be, like I understood that craziness.
Mhm.
Versus in publishing, I still have no clue like what's going on at the time, or I'm often surprised by something.
Mm.
So I think that give me a couple more years, maybe I'll get a hold on something, get a hold on this industry. But for now, I still feel like I'm still learning, which is both exciting and terrifying.
Mm. Is there something that comes to mind? Something that surprised you about the book industry, or has come up that has surprised you?
Uh, let's see. So the idea of like, your kind of like your book scan number, which, for I'm sure people understand the idea of like, how many books you're selling
Mm-hmm.
and how that kind of like applies to, what maybe you may be offered later on for another book.
Mm-hmm.
Um, in the television world, that's kind of called the P&L statement, the profit and loss statement.
Mm-hmm.
Like, is this show bringing enough money for us to renew it again? And same thing in publishing. Is this girl selling enough books for us to renew or buy another book from her?
Mm.
And that was something that was a little surprising to me, especially when you see people who aren't maybe selling a lot of books and get contracts that are way higher than me.
Mm.
So there's so much confusion with that. And I'm like,
Mm.
well, why did this person get more marketing dollars than I did? And
Yeah.
or why did this person, like, you know what I mean? Like there's a lot of like unanswered questions in publishing that I still kind of don't know. This past year, I learned, which I didn't know, that large print books are actually like, there's a whole publisher for that. I thought
Mm.
books are large print books, like, especially for, because I used to see a lot of large print books in my grandparents' nursing homes. I didn't realize, I thought books were always printed large. I didn't know that you actually had like a special contract to have your book printed large. So
Mm.
so that was something very fascinating for me to learn at the what was that? This is my fourth book. So yeah, there's definitely been some learning every year. I
Mm.
feel like I
Mm-hmm.
learned something new.
Mm-hmm. Well, and it's an accomplishment to be at 4 books in, right? That means you have been getting renewed or new projects picked up, right? Like you got over
Yes.
that first hurdle. What was that like going into the first book and then, maybe that period of not knowing what was going to happen next, if anything?
Yeah, there was a lot of not knowing in the first book. There was so much that I didn't realize I was going to have to do myself.
Mm.
From making my own let's see, Instagram badges, to buy my own swag to give away to readers.
Mm.
There was so much I didn't know, like, kind of knowing what to put on your website, knowing that how to put an event together at the bookstore, knowing who even booksellers are and why they're so important and why it's so important to actually talk to them.
Yeah.
Also librarians, how they're like powerful allies that don't get
Mm.
enough credit.
Mm.
So I think that there was a lot that it was like a crash course. And there was so much like, anxiety moving up to the day that you publish. And then right after you publish, like that's it. It just goes quiet for a little bit.
Yeah.
Especially like my books didn't get a lot of like buzz in the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
So there was definitely some silence. And I will say that, and I always say this, is that my book actually alone saved itself. Like the actual quality of the book saved my career.
Mm.
Because if people weren't still talking about the book, even to today, no one would have known who I was. So I always tell people, like, don't worry about having like, a flashy, like, don't worry, don't don't be worried about being like a flash in the pan, as they say.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Like, worry about your book, worry about what you can control, because
Mm-hmm.
quality is king. And if your book isn't good, like, why should anyone buy something from you again?
Yeah.
So I think it's about writing really good books, really good stories that really make people start paying attention to you. Like, be so good you can't be ignored, and that's pretty much what happened.
So it sounds like, again, not putting words in your mouth, but it sounds like maybe you had some unmet expectations with the launch of the first book in terms of how it did.
Um, yeah, because I guess because maybe I didn't know what expectations to have,
Mm.
and then later on, especially like 4 books in, I then start to like notice. I'm like, wait, that didn't happen in my first book, like,
Mm.
or I didn't get this, or I didn't get that, which not every book is going to get the red carpet treatment.
Mm.
Um, which I think that's all fair in love and war, honestly. Like, if every book got the red carpet treatment, there wouldn't be enough books. There wouldn't be enough money to buy books.
Yeah.
And sometimes it really is about, knowing that your front list is going to sell your back list.
Mm.
So the most important thing you can do is to keep on writing. So there was a lot of things that didn't happen. But if I like kind of got stuck in that mode of like disappointment, like in the very beginning,
Mm.
I wouldn't have a career.
Mm.
And I don't want to be, and I always say, like, you don't want to be like a person who wrote a book. You want to be an author.
Mm. Was your first book that got published your first book you wrote?
No, I wrote a couple of books before then. I think, talk about like or four, maybe four by the time I got to allegedly.
Mm.
Um, which I think is important,
Yeah.
right? Because I think it's sort of like training. It's like being in sports or being like an Olympic athlete. You write each book, you get better as you go along. And so I think that's, I don't really get sad about the idea of like, oh, this book didn't get traditionally published, or, oh, this book is still in my drawer. Like, I feel like that, like, no book is wasted.
Were you, with each book that you were writing from the first one, were you like immediately going and pitching those or getting feedback?
In the beginning, yes, I did. And that's what I mean by like, in terms of like, this industry has definitely changed, because, there were books that I pitched that they said, no one would want to buy this. And then later on, I see those same books being written by somebody else.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Or very similar topics. So I'm
Yeah.
like, oh, okay. Um, sure.
Timing, huh?
Right.
Yeah. And so when you were writing your very first book, like, were you in the mindset like, or I guess it was a better question. Did you have some sense of how this was going to work, or were you feel kind of naive and feeling that, everything was your future rest on that first book you wrote?
Um, like the first book, or like the first
Yeah,
that's been
yeah.
published?
Yeah, no, the first, because
Oh
that's that
man.
time. Like, a lot of us spend a lot of time just figuring it out right at the beginning, and expectations
Yeah.
drive good and bad
Yeah.
behaviors, right?
Right. I think that first book taught me how to finish something.
Hmm.
Because I think that's one of the things that we lose sight of, is that,
Mm-hmm.
we all, like, I can't tell you how many times I've heard like, oh, I always wanted to write a novel, or, oh, there's a story that you should write for me. Like, no, write it yourself. But then when people sit down, the idea of like putting all these words on the page and it makes sense and, is grammatically correct, like, immediately people start giving up. And
Yeah.
so writing, like finishing a book, like actually like finishing a book, right? Like having a book that's like 55,000 words minimum, Like that takes some gumption, that takes some resilience.
Yeah.
And so I think that's important for us to it's a marathon. And some people drop out of the marathon. And so
Yeah. I
I
think
think
they feel like
it
a failure, right? If they don't,
right,
aren't an overnight success, right?
right. So I think it's important for us to not lose sight of that. Because there are a lot of overnight success,
Stories.
stories, but
Yeah.
yeah, but we don't hear from them ever again.
Yeah. Hmm. And is that because quality is king? Or,
100%.
hmm.
Because sometimes when you do kind of become like I mentioned before, like a flash in the pan, when you do come out the gate and you get all the bells and whistles and the red carpet and everything like
Hmm.
that for this one book that you wrote, and you try to repeat that magic and you can't.
Mm-hmm.
It is incredibly depressing
Hmm.
to notice the difference of
Hmm.
how you were treated.
Hmm.
So I personally I prefer to kind of like slowly grow,
Yeah.
um, rather than be so. I prefer the long tail, or how I kind of describe it,
Hmm.
because I'm able to sort of see that progression and see, especially when it comes to sales or book deals or how marketing is going and stuff like that. I can look back and say like, okay, these are the things that work. They will continue to work. I'm 4 books in or 5 books in, 6 books
Hmm.
in. Like I know that these things will actually work. Versus if I was to do all of that in the front, I
Hmm.
wouldn't know how to carry myself for the rest of it, for the
Yeah.
rest of my career.
Yeah. Have you had mentors along the way that have been important?
Um, Huge mentor for me was or is Tahari Jones,
Hmm.
who wrote the book American Marriage, and one of my favorite books, Silver Sparrow. And she told me when I was in the middle of writing Allegedly, my first novel that was published. I was getting frustrated because I was still getting like rejected by queer letters, kept getting rejected.
Hmm.
And at some point, maybe like my 20th, you know, rejection, I finally emailed her and I was like, yeah, so I'm not gonna be an author anymore. I quit.
Hmm.
And she was she emailed me back. She was like, call me. And so I called her and I was like, oh, this is so terrible, blah, blah. And she was like, well, tell me what your book is about again. And, I spilled it out. And she was like, well, it sounds like your book is a young adult novel. And I was
Hmm.
like, what's that?
Hmm.
That entire time, I had been pitching my book as an adult contemporary.
Ah. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
when I went back, when I revised it and started pitching it, querying it as a young adult, I had way more offers. I had 4 offers like
Hmm.
within like the 2 month span.
Wow.
So I will say that's a hard. Without her, I probably wouldn't still be here because I was ready to quit.
Yeah.
And she always sort of like she definitely tells me she tells it like it is, and I love her honesty, and that has definitely helped me along the way. So I think that she's one of the greatest sort of mentors to have in
Hmm.
this space.
Do you remember how you like met or became acquainted with Tahari?
It may have been Twitter.
Hmm.
And she was also living in Brooklyn at the time. She so we see each other at different like literary events, or we hang out and stuff like that. And then she knew I wanted to be a writer, and she would ask me what I was working on, and it'd always be some of those books that never saw the light of day.
Hmm.
So she was one of those people who kind of checked on me, every now and then, just making sure I was like, are you writing? And I'm like, all right.
Well, that's an interesting question. So you must have been busy with life and right your career in film, and you had this dream future thing. But like how did you, like at what point did you decide to make space for that?
um, I think maybe it kind of goes back to what I was saying about like, dreams, right? Where it
Mm.
sort of holds you that, won't let go. You can't sleep, you can't rest. So you find ways to make time for it. So what I did, which, at the time I still was working in television, and some days I was doing like 17-hour days, but I
Mm-hmm.
always tried to fit in time. So I typically woke up at like 5 o'clock in the morning. So I was a morning writer.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I wrote until I had to get ready for work, and then left for work. Would edit on the train. I would write during lunchtime. I was writing in between takes. A lot of my books, a good portion of it was written on my phone. A lot of people think that I'm always like on my phone, kind of like scrolling through Instagram or something like that. No, I'm in my
Mm-hmm.
notepad. Like I think the novel I'm working on now, about 15,000 words, was in my notepad. So yeah, you find the time, you make sacrifices. If this is something you really truly want,
Yeah.
um, which I definitely did, and so that's kind of where it came from. And there was birthday parties I missed,
Mm.
concerts I missed, weekends that I was like stuck at my desk. Money I spent to go to like conferences and whatnot. Dog went without food some days, but like I kept at it basically, and
Yeah,
I made
you anticipated my question there too. It was like,
right.
but it sounds like you just kind of like were clear about your decision making. It wasn't really a debate what you were going to give up
It
to do
honestly
it.
was it was honestly the one thing I've been 100% sure about in my life.
Wow.
Like everything else, I'm even now I still like I'm like, oh, what do I want to eat? Should
Mm,
I buy this dress or not? And should I go here or not? Should I take the vaccine or not? Like, there's been so
hmm.
many kind of like questions I still like, I indecisions.
Yeah.
But I knew I wanted to tell this story. I knew I wanted to publish a book. And honestly, this has gone way surpassed my dreams, quite frankly, because
Mm,
I would have, if it was just one book, I would have been happy.
mm, mm.
If I had just made it to that, like, what does Rocky say? Like, if I just go the distance, like,
Yeah, yeah. You got to the 15th round, and that's what he does,
yes,
right?
yes. Like,
Yeah.
I felt like I was, very beaten at that point. And
Mhm.
so by the time you do like get there, and when you cross like the finish line, it's like I did it.
Mm.
Like I
Well,
did it,
that
and
raises an interesting question that I've thought a lot about in the past is once you've finished the dream, it's like almost like an event and then it's over with, right? So like
yes.
then what? How does the idea of success change from the first time like you achieved a dream, now you're exceeding the dream. So what is success now?
I think success is continuing to write novels that you're still passionate about.
Mm,
That's still sort of like, oh, I want to get up early and write this, like, and, work on this draft. I
mm,
think that's success is when you're actually happy and at peace with what you're doing. And, not every day is going to be roses, like
mhm,
I'm definitely one of those people who, have to do things I don't really want to, like maybe update my website or, revise an old story that I don't really like anymore. We all have those moments.
yeah.
Um, but I think there's something still very magical about being able to do, like, to be able to work in this field in
Yeah.
any capacity, um, is magic in itself because there's
Mm,
so many people, millions of people who want to be in your shoes.
yeah.
And so I think kind of staying in a place of gratitude and staying in a place of just like still being in awe of
Mm,
what you're doing. I think that's, one of the key to success,
mm,
really. And and I may get tired of this. I may say like, I don't want to do this anymore.
yeah.
But at least feel like I lived a life that was worthy of living. Like
Mm,
I lived a life that I lived a very full life if I was to stop writing at any
Mm.
point. I still feel like I would have lived a huge, big life, living
Yeah.
big.
And just because you stopped writing books may not mean that you've stopped living with purpose, right? Or
Oh yeah,
contributing
no, no.
value and those. So if you weren't writing books, what and you were still wanting to be at peace with your choices and right and living a life worthy of living and full, what would you be doing?
Man, I get this question a lot, and I always land on this very random answer, but I, I would, I would own a tea shop.
Ooh,
Like, I always say, like, but it would be a very, like, I'd be kind of like a recluse, like
yeah.
living where no one would find me, and, just having a very quiet life and just having a tea shop where we serve, like, you know, different teas and sandwiches and good desserts. Like, I just have a very quiet life, um, which, in comparison, you know, um, writing could be, or that's the one thing that they didn't tell you. I think when I was younger and thought I was going to be an author, I truly thought I was going to be the old woman by the sea. Like, I thought, like, I wouldn't have to deal with anybody. But that's not the case. Like, I have to talk to kids,
Mm.
adults every single day almost. And especially when it wasn't COVID time, I was touring a lot too. So
Hmm.
it was a lot of interaction with people.
Yeah.
And I both love it and both like it's also exhausting at the
Yeah.
same time.
Yeah.
So I think the like that so that when people ask me like what I want to do, I'm like, yeah, I want to live a quiet life.
I suppose you could have both,
Yeah,
and not at the
yeah.
same time always. You know,
Right.
so you know how I asked you to introduce yourself, right? I,
Uh-huh.
I've been doing that ever since I talked to an author named, a screenwriter named Terry Tatchell, and she's
Uh-huh.
best known for being a writer on District 9, the movie.
Oh, yeah.
And so everybody wants to talk to her about that, right? And the fan service. But I asked her to introduce herself, and we had an entirely different conversation because it turns out her dream wasn't being an Oscar nominated screenwriter and these other things. It was writing kids' books and having a tea shop. And that's what she's doing.
My gosh.
Yeah. And
That's
she,
amazing.
yeah. So I learned my lesson that day. Like, we have our narrative about who you are, Tiffany, but you've got your own narrative about your life and
Oh.
what's important. And so, what's ahead for you the year ahead?
Oh, so I had a book come out actually last month. I co-wrote a book with Yelsa Shabazz, that's Malcolm X's daughter. We wrote a
Mm-hmm.
book called The Awakening of Malcolm X, which basically tells his story during his prison sentence.
Mm-hmm.
So that was first of the 2021. I have a co-author book with several authors called Blackout, which is a story of, it's interlinked stories celebrating Black love that comes out in June. I have my first horror novel coming out in September called White Smoke.
Mm-hmm.
And which I love horror, so this is going to be amazing. It's a haunted house kind of like story. And then switching gears, I have a picture book coming out in October, and it's Santa in the City. And I kind of call it my memoir because it's basically about a girl who lives in a city, and her mother, convinces her that Santa's able to come even to kids in the city.
Wow, you're kind of all over the place this year.
Yeah, it seems like it, right?
Which
Yeah.
sounds like a good thing. And you get
Yeah,
to, yeah, I guess the screen, like, guess working in film would have prepared you for collaborating and co-writing, because I know that's
yes.
something that authors can get hung up on, right?
Yeah, we had Donald Clayton was sort of the captain of the ship.
Hmm.
It's Donald Clayton, Nick Stone, Angie Thomas, Nicola Yoon, and Ashley Woodfolk. And it was kind of cool writing this sort of love story that takes place during a New York City blackout with all of these amazing authors who are all like my girls. And so it
Hmm.
was fun to sort of do this while we're all stuck inside during the quarantine. So
Yeah.
it it took our minds off of things, lots of things.
Yes.
But yeah, I think it definitely has challenges, of course, because we're not all in the same place. But I feel like it was such a it came together so beautifully that
Hmm.
I'm in awe of it.
Hmm. Hmm. Well, for people who want to know more about you, how can they find you?
You could look up more about me on my website at WriteandBK. That's WriteInBK.com. You can also follow me on Twitter and Instagram, same hashtag at WriteandBK, WriteInBK. And yeah, that's pretty much where I hang out.
Awesome. Well, Tiffany, it's been a pleasure having you on the podcast.
Thank you so much. It's been a great questions too.
Thank you. I hope you've enjoyed today's episode of The Fearless Storyteller. As a reminder, any and all links can be found in the show notes. And if you're enjoying this podcast, will you please consider leaving a review? By doing so, you'll be helping new listeners discover the Fearless Storyteller podcast.